Okay, in this lesson we will discuss what is life.
Even a small child realizes that an ant or a plant is alive, whereas a rock or a car is not. But the phenomenon we call life defies a one-sentence definition. We recognize life mainly by what living things do, but it is difficult to recognize life for what it is.
There is currently no consensus regarding the definition of life. One popular definition is that organisms are open systems that have the following characteristics. 1. Responsiveness to the environment. 2. Growth and change. 3. Ability to reproduce. 4. Have a metabolism and breathe. 5. Maintain homeostasis. 6. Being made of cells. And 7. Passing traits onto offspring.
We say that life is an emergent property, because we must use a list of properties to define it. When units of biological material are put together, the properties of the new material are not always additive, or equal to the sum of the properties of the components. Instead, at each level, new properties and rules emerge that cannot be predicted by observations and full knowledge of the lower levels. Such properties are called emergent properties. Take for example a tripod, which is a structure that can stand on its own. Tripods are made of 3 poles, but each separate pole does not have the property of standing on its own. The self-supporting property only emerges when 3 poles are interacting as a system on the tripod.
Life itself is an example of an emergent property. For instance, a single-celled bacterium is alive, but if you separate the macromolecules that combine to create the bacterium, these units are not alive. Based on our knowledge of macromolecules, we would not have been able to predict that they could combine to form a living organism. Nor could we have predicted all of the characteristics of the resulting bacterium. Taking into account the above, we will have to settle for a definition of life based on a series of qualities. Now let's look a little more in detail at what those qualities consist of.
Responding to the environment. All living organisms respond to their environment. If you step on a rock, it will just lie there, but if you step on a turtle, it may move or even snap at you. Living things know what is going on around them, and respond to changes in the environment. An adaptation refers to the process of becoming adjusted to an environment. Adaptations may include structural, physiological, or behavioral traits that improve an organism's likelihood of survival, and thus, reproduction.
Growth and change. All living organisms have the ability to grow and change. A seed may look like a pebble, but under the right conditions it will sprout and form a seedling that will grow into a larger plant. The pebble of course will not grow. Even the smallest bacteria must grow. This bacteria will reproduce by dividing into 2 separate bacterium. If the parent bacterium does not grow, then each subsequent generation will just be smaller than the previous generation. Eventually the bacteria will be too small to function properly.
Reproduction. All living organisms must have the ability to reproduce. Living things make more organisms like themselves. Whether the organism is a rabbit, or a tree, or a bacterium, life will create more life. If a species cannot create the next generation, the species will go extinct. Reproduction is the process of making the next generation and may be a sexual or an asexual process. Sexual reproduction involves 2 parents and the fusion of gametes, haploid sex cells from each parent. Sexual reproduction produces offspring that are genetically unique and increases genetic variation within a species. Asexual reproduction involves only one parent. It occurs without a fusion of gametes and produces offspring that are all genetically identical to the parent.
Organization and complexity. All living organisms have a complex chemistry. A flower has a complicated and beautiful structure. So does a crystal. But if you look closely at the crystal, you see no change. The flower, on the other hand, is transporting water through its petals, producing pigment molecules, breaking down sugar for energy, and undergoing a large number of other biochemical reactions that are needed for living organisms to stay alive. The sum of all the chemical reactions in a cell is metabolism.
Maintain homeostasis. A human body has a temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. If you step outside on a cold morning, the temperature might be below freezing. Nevertheless, you do not become an ice cube. You shiver and the movement in your arms and legs allows you to stay warm. Eating food also gives your body the energy it needs to keep warm. Living organisms keep their internal environments within a certain range, despite changes in their external environment. This process is called homeostasis, and is an important characteristic of all living.
Built of cells. If you look closely at any organism, you can see that it is made of structures called cells. Organisms that are very different, such as ferns, fish, and elephants, all look similar at the cellular level. A cell is the basic unit of structure and function of all living organisms. All living organisms are made of one or more cells. A simple bacterium will consist of just one cell, whereas you are made of trillions.
The problem of viruses. Scientific opinions differ on whether viruses are a form of life or organic structures that interact with living organisms. Viruses have been described as organisms at the edge of life, since they resemble organisms in that they possess genes, evolved by natural selection, and reproduce by creating multiple copies of themselves through self-assembly. Although they have genes, they do not have a cellular structure, which is often seen as the basic unit of.
Many viruses, like the tobacco mosaic virus, literally crystallizes like inorganic structures such as salts when found outside of a host cell. Viruses do not have their own metabolism and require a host cell to make new products. They therefore cannot naturally reproduce outside a host cell. Accepted forms of life use cell division to reproduce, whereas viruses spontaneously assemble within cells. They differ from autonomous growth of crystals as they inherit genetic mutations while being subject to natural selection, therefore they can adapt to the defenses of their hosts quickly. Virus self-assembly within host cells has implications for the study of the origin of life, as it lends further credence to the hypothesis that life could have started as self-assembling organic molecules.
Okay, this is all for the moment. If you liked it, please do not forget to subscribe, and we will see us in the next opportunity. Goodbye.